Good afternoon, everybody. We welcome everyone to our latest live webinar provided to you by Usawa Wellness Services. We are a mental wellness practice located in the greater San Antonio area, and today's topic is advocating for your child at school. We have our panelists today that comes with a great variety of knowledge and experience in both administration and school counseling, and I'm going to bring them forward, and I'll give them a little bit of time just to introduce themselves and let us know a little bit about themselves in relation to the topic at hand today.
Hey, I'm Jenny. I'm a social worker. In my previous life,
Good
I worked
afternoon,
with.
ladies.
Hello. Sorry, there was a huge
Hey,
delay on my end. I'm sorry.
that's okay. As
No.
normal.
But I was gonna say, in my previous life, I worked with communities and schools during internship. So I saw a lot of mental health concerns within the school system, but also worked with a lot of high risk youth who definitely could benefit from some of the services that could be some of the resources and services that could have been available. And then after that, I worked in a case management therapeutic setting, working with another high risk population in the medical setting. And so there were a lot of physical needs, but also mental health needs as well. So there was a lot of advocating, communicating with the school, attending IEP ARD meetings. So just a lot of advocacy on my part with the families. So that's kind of a little bit of my background for this topic specifically.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny.
Hi, I'm Kelly Sellers. I'm an associate clinical therapist here at USAWA. My past life, I was a school counselor. I was a school counselor for 6 years, and a teacher, middle school and upper elementary middle teacher for 8 years before that. So about 14 years total in the school system. So I'm very familiar. I did a lot of work with our special education population as well when I was a counselor, along with everybody else. But that was my job. I was an advocate for mental health in the schools for many, many years. Still am, just outside of them.
Thanks, Kelly.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kiki. I'm a graduate intern at Texas A&M San Antonio, and I'm presently doing my internship at USAWA. And before that, in my former life, I was a middle school history teacher in Northside for 17 years and total education for 25 years. And I was a collaboration teacher for special education, so I know a whole lot about IEPs and advocating for your children.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. So I guess a great place to start would be with you, Kiki, and kind of giving us, why is advocating for your child's mental health in school so crucial?
Well, advocating for your child in particular is very important. As a parent, you should know that you are your child's biggest supporter and the biggest advocate. You're the one that knows your child the best. So it's up to you as a parent to be responsible to make sure that all the administration, the teachers, and everything know what your child needs. And I'll speak frankly, one of my children has IEP, and he also has anxiety. So the first thing I do before any school year, first day of school, even before that, I reach out to all his teachers and I make sure they know his needs, his plans, and they have my contact information. And also, I also tell them that I was a teacher too, just to give them a heads up that what to prepare for. But as a parent, you have to
Mhm.
tell them exactly what your child needs. But they won't look for it for you. You have to tell them up front.
Mm, that's a good point. What do you feel some of the key challenges parents face, or maybe you faced often when you try to advocate for your child in a school setting?
Yeah.
I guess
Well,
you
the
could
first
speak
thing,
to like different lenses.
uh, oh yeah. Well, first of all, the first thing they think I always struggle with is they think I'm a helicopter parent. Any parent who emails too much, they consider, oh, here we go again. It's that parent, or they say, oh, that's a teacher's kid. That parent. So they already look at me cross-eyed already and think I'm going to be a helicopter parent. But I just make sure I be as friendly. I make sure I tell them, we're in this together. Not that I'm trying to tell them how to do their job, but tell them it's a collaborative effort. If they notice any things that I miss, they with that child 8 hours a day. The teachers know them. They should know the child just as much as you do. So I feel like it should have to be a collaboration. The parent and teacher have to work together. I can't make sure my child has what he needs if I'm not communicating with the teacher and letting them do their job as well. So my job is also to be a support system. I will volunteer for situations I know my child had problems in, like he has social anxiety. So I make sure I'll volunteer for the field trips to make sure he feels safe. There's someone there. Just things like that to make the journey quick, easier. Just make sure you tell your kids' needs up front, and don't be afraid of being labeled a helicopter parent, because you're supposed to take care of your child. I mean, if you're not going to do, who else will?
What about you, Kelly? Were there any key challenges that you noticed or could add that parents often face?
I think I agree. I wholeheartedly with Kiki. Having been in that, my son has not an IEP, as a 504. So I've been on both sides. And you're not a helicopter parent, Kiki. A helicopter parent cannot hear outside of their own little bubble. And that's the difference, is that I don't know what it would be, but it's a collaboration, right? Like a helicopter parent is like, this is how it is. This is how I need you to do things. And they don't want the collaboration piece. And like you said, these teachers are with your kids all day long, or minimum 45 minutes a day, but every single day. And they see your kid in a different environment. I mean, I think I've had the parent that is like, that's not my kid. They don't do that. And there has to be that space of like, your kid is very different with you at home than they are at school, the same way we are different at work than we are at home. And it's just natural. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing awful things. It's just, you have to understand that the dynamics are different there, and that the goal is working together. Because I have had to make many a phone call to a parent about many different things. And it's always best on the education side to come to meet a parent and say, hey, and this is what we're seeing. Have you ever seen this at home? And if you have, what works at home? It's a collaboration piece, And so as a parent, it can feel sometimes like the teachers, might be teachers or educators who don't want to work with you, but they really genuinely do. If they know that you're coming from a place of like, we're all in this together, then they are more than willing to talk to you about it. And they want to know, like, it is hard walking into a room, into a school with 25 kids, 150 kids if you're in the secondary, and doing for all of them. I think all educators at their heart want to do the best for every single kid. We ask a lot of our educators, and sometimes they can't. So any of it helps them. Anything, my son loves airplanes. I'm like, look, if you can just talk to him about an airplane for like a minute, he'll do anything for you, And I was like, less than 1 minute of your time, And so I think help teachers get an in with your kids. Was that even the question? I'm just
I'm sure.
Somewhere
I guess,
I
but no, I mean,
right?
you bring up a great point when you spoke to. So then I ask you guys this, because I think another challenge that parents might face is just kind of like the ever-changing legislation that surrounds school in general. So I know, like, you guys even brought up IEP and 504. Can anyone explain what an IEP is? And
Kiki, you want me to take this one?
Okay.
You're on mute, Kiki.
I'm sitting jabbing away. I'm sorry. An IEP is individual education plan. And for example, my son has one, and he struggles in math. And so he has things that in place for him. He has a collaborative teacher. He has notes, aids. He has extended time. those type of things. So those are things that well, he had to be, first of all, he had to be tested to get that kind of services in the first place. But once you do have it, each teacher is responsible for following all the accommodations in place, and that's law. They have to follow it, or you're in danger of having your teacher's license revoked. So that is very important. And a 504 plan, it could be accommodations mostly. Like my daughter has asthma really bad, so she has accommodation for that in place for anything that happens. But those things have to be followed by law. If it says your child has to have a snack in between classes because they're diabetic, they have to follow those plans. Otherwise, they're infringing upon law. They're breaking the law. So as a parent, it's best to know your rights. Know what the current legislation is. Know what the special education laws are. Know and also be present at the IEP meetings and 504 meetings. Those things are important because they actually put a plan in place for your child that they have to follow to make sure your child's successful. And if they don't follow it, I mean, I look at mine like, okay, well, he's struggling here. Well, did you do this, this, and that? That is like your piece of paper, your document, your contract that you have enacted with the school education system, and they have to follow it.
And it's many times that the school may overlook that, and a parent may miss out on that. So you bring up a good point, Kiki. It's like, the schedule of the meetings and you are supposed to be present for those. And if you cannot be present for those, then you can ask for an advocate to sit in your place. And I think that is some of the things that are not communicated to parents as effectively in all schools. But I know, Kelly, you were going to say something as well.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to sort of differentiate, as I hear there's like some confusion or overlap in the 504 and the IEP world. And so a 504, we say it's like, what is this number? It is within section 504 of the law. So 504 accommodations come from a diagnosable situation. So that's why you have kids with asthma and diabetes who can have a 504. You also have kids with anxiety, ADHD, and those sort of mental health diagnoses. And that is when they need accommodations. And an accommodation is just a little support, same curriculum. What is being taught doesn't change. They just need a little help. It can be that they have a little extra time. It can be that they have a specific preferential seating is what you'll hear. That doesn't mean it's right at the front. It's where they're comfortable. It can be a shortened assignment. If they can do in 10 questions and show you mastery what other kids might do in 50 without anxiety, 10 questions can be helpful. These are different accommodations. They are mastering the same skills. In Texas, you have the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, the TEKS. They're mastering the same skills. An IEP is in the realm of special education, which, like Kiki said, your child has been tested. The school psychologist has tested them, and there is an educational need, meaning there's a deficit in their learning, and they need either accommodations or modifications, as well as which they change the actual curriculum to the level that they need. So there is a difference, and it is important that you know that my son has a 504 because that's kind of where we started. And he's stayed successful academically. So we have not had to test for special education services to get more support. If we had needed to, we would have. But there's an educational need, which adds those extra services. And I know there's a huge stigma with putting your kid in special education. There shouldn't be. It is support to make sure your kid is successful. And ideally, they are being tested every 3 years. They have a 3-year reevaluation to see if they still need those services. What you as a parent need to do is to advocate and talk to your kid about using really official, like actual purposeful accommodations and possible modifications. Because what happens a lot of times is that we sort of throw everything at the wall. Let's just give them all the accommodations, which you're setting the teacher up for failure. They cannot provide 27 accommodations to 27 kids. So doing purposeful accommodations so that they will sort of catch up, so that when they are reevaluated for special education, they could possibly be dismissed in the admission review dismissal ARD meeting. Because that's the ideal goal, is for them to be dismissed, to have caught up. Not everyone will, and that's ideal-ish, I guess, but there are kids who need support forever, and that's also okay. But you want the support to be purposeful, and based on data, but also based on your child. Because there are times advocating for your child as a person and not as a data set, because they will say, oh, well, they don't read at this level. We need to put them in this class. They need to have this support. They need to have this. Okay, maybe. But as a person, like what is best for them socially? What is best for them? How can we get to the end goal using a variety of things? That's my piece on that.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kelly. I think that's important to know the difference between the two, because they are used quite often and sometimes in the wrong context. Because again, that goes back to just kind of the miseducation and not succinct, like very specific guidelines that are given to parents when offering services, or even letting parents know what. Yes, I also want to ask then, support parents in like effective regards to their teachers or administrators in the school they're at.
Could you excuse me? Could you repeat some of that
Yeah,
it
sorry.
completely cut out.
Sure.
It completely, yeah, it was.
It's no problem. Well, I guess like, so as mental health professionals, how can we support parents in effectively communicating their child's mental health needs to the educators and administrators within the school system?
I think first it starts with just in the therapy setting of course, of just like the psychoeducation piece of, okay, this is the diagnosis. This is, what do you know about that diagnosis? What do you find helpful for your child? Like, what are their coping strategies? Where are they starting? What does the baseline look like in the home, in school? And so just preparing and empowering the parents to be able to explain their diagnosis to their child, but also just depending on the age appropriateness of it, allowing the child to be able to describe what is going on with them, and what they're experiencing and some of their concerns, and how to advocate and ask for help if needed. Again, kind of going from a different perspective of, I did a lot of advocacy for the medical piece of things, but how that could then affect the mental health of kiddos. So recognizing and educating of like, right now, yes, this is physical, these are some of the common symptoms that may come up though, regarding mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, just self-esteem, things like that, and just kind of working on how to set those boundaries, but educating the parents on what the diagnosis is, how they can easily communicate that, and then of course providing whatever resources are available. If someone needs to discuss more in detail of like what those accommodations might look like, just kind of going over some of those things based on their child's needs. So I think it just starts with a lot of psychoeducation in the therapy setting.
Mm-hmm. Is there any way for mental health professionals and educators to work together to identify early signs of mental health concerns?
Yes.
I
think yes, absolutely. I think there's different layers of it. I think that is something that systemically needs to be talked about more just overall. Not that I don't want to add more to the plates of teachers, but you are there with them, and it's not that they need to be implementing counseling or therapy to the kids, but recognizing patterns and teaching those patterns or symptoms or behaviors to teachers in more than a 45-minute beginning of the year in service that I have given multiple times, that is more throughout the year, and reminders and hey, if you see these things, because they look very different, especially in little kids. The tummy ache thing is anxiety. I feel like we should all know this. If you don't, the tummy ache thing is anxiety. And so, you know, like these pieces that it's more physical than mental sometimes in little kids, but if they can recognize it and the and the piece of, I know there's a lot of teachers that are educated on this. They're very scared to tell parents that they see it.
Mm.
And so being open and receptive to that message, that when a teacher says, I've noticed these things, that I've many a phone call also where the first thing I say is, your kid is not in trouble. Everything is okay. We just want to talk, like in one breath. Because if the school calls you, we automatically assume our kid is in trouble. But being able to have those conversations and opening them up early, like Kiki said, like starting that like that back and forth early, even if it is just like if you open that up with a teacher's going to talk to you a lot. Hey, they had a rough morning, just FYI, they'll probably get it together by second period or by 10, whatever. So they know that they can have that conversation is a really big help, so that when they can go, hey, you know, Ben is a little off today. Is everything okay? You're receptive to it. Because they do know your kids and they can tell when they're a little off.
And they see them in the most social type of environment too. And so that is definitely a different, you know, experience than at home, you know, where they're not dealing with so many personalities and experiences.
Yeah. Especially the secondary kids. I mean, little kids in elementary, like everybody's friends in that class, like it's fine. But don't dismiss the social aspect of school when they're like, this kid doesn't like me, these kids are mad at me. That's a big piece of it. That is 85% of why if not 95% of why they are going to school. And so we want to say, just forget about them. Don't worry about them. They can't at that age, you know,
right.
So
they can't avoid them.
You can't avoid it. And your kid can't compartmentalize like that way. They're in class with this kid or at lunch with this kid, and their brains can't do that yet. And so acknowledging that piece when your kid even talks about it, just being receptive to the reality of what it is. And don't say, you don't know how bad it is.
I think I want to throw in there, when we talk about working with the mental health professionals, if you are getting your child assessed by a psychiatrist or a LSSP, do know that some of the assessments can be taken by teachers. They do have teacher reports of some certain assessments, and that also plays a huge part in the actual like conceptualization of any diagnosis that your child may have. So if you go to a psychologist and they want to administer a battery of tests, ask if there are any teacher report or teacher specific ones that you could possibly ask your child's teacher to take as well. I think it will help paint a broader picture, a more individualized, broader picture for your child. That's something I didn't know. So until like I saw all these different assessments that teachers could actually fill out, I was like, oh, that's important. And to Kiki's point, they're spending 8 hours a day with our child in elementary school, at least for sure. And so their viewpoint is and their perspective is pretty important. All right, ladies. So tell me, are there any resources or tools that parents can use to better educate themselves about their rights or their child's rights? Like any websites or organizations?
Oh, yeah.
There?
Definitely. One of the big ones that I love, and I know it's for transitions. And when we speak of transition, we talk about more so of like transitioning from that, you know, in the healthcare setting, like pediatric model to adult model of care, but in the school setting, just, you know, from that childhood to adulthood, essentially. And so it's not just for this, but gottransition.org is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful resource. It has, even if your child is not transitioning from childhood to adulthood, there are a lot of resources for IEPs. There's very specific plans. There are checklists that you can go over, because I think going back to that education piece, is really, really important for kids specifically. So it's like, can I communicate to someone else what medications I'm taking? Can I communicate to someone else what my specific accommodations are? Am I able to communicate XYZ? So it's really nice. They have a lot of pre-planned things. They have a lot of packets that you can put together that you can give to teachers, to medical providers. So it does speak a lot from the medical transition sense. But if you have any, if you have a 504 or an IEP, you likely have some sort of medical or medicinal need at some point, possibly. And so it is important to kind of include those two. And there's another one that I used to use all the time, and it just left my brain, but it's one specific to Texas. So it goes through, and maybe it'll trigger something for someone else, but I will keep thinking on that. But it is specific to Texas. And it is, you can go through the different sections. They have videos to watch. They have special sections for 504, for ARD, IEP, transition. They have talking points, they have education. I mean, it is such an invaluable resource. They go through the special education process, links to advocates, everything. And I would just encourage, and again, through this, I will be thinking of what that website is, but because it's not very helpful if you don't know what it is. But all that to say is there are absolutely websites for parents to educate themselves. YouTube, there are just so many things people get on and talk about that. So there are just a lot of educational resources, like technology wise, that can absolutely be used. Navigate Life Texas. Thank you. That's what it is. But yes, invaluable.
Thanks, Jenny. Any other ones from the maybe school side, Kelly or Kiki, that you guys feel maybe mental health professionals or school personnel could use as resources if, to help in the advocating of a child? I know there's TEA. I don't know how helpful TEA is, but I know that's out there.
Sorry, it would unmute. For basic resources, TEA will have things listed for you that you can sort of go to, and they will explain in Texas, the Texas Education Agency, the structure of the Texas Education Agency. So it's helpful in that sense. Also, hopefully, the school district website, if you go to either guidance services, counseling services, student support services, depending on how they name it, will hopefully have a link for parents with resources that you can go to for parents. And hopefully that department will have that mental health link to their school counselors who are helping the teachers as well. There's been a push for more school counselors to be clinical mental health counselors as well. We're working on it.
Got it.
I just wanted to also add, other parents also are very good at being a resource. Support parent groups, even parents in the school setting, they're very helpful. So I found the parents in the same situation I was to be a very helpful and support system. So that's another resource you can look at too.
That's definitely a good point.
Yeah.
Texas Parent to Parent, or TXP2P. Texas Parent to Parent is another great resource. So what you can do is you can connect based on need, and it's where other parents are the experts, essentially. So you can agree to sign up for, you all can text message back and forth if that's what your comfortability is. You can call, you can meet up publicly, whatever you need. So it is basically, you can identify, for example, my child has this diagnosis. I can search for other parents on this website that have also registered with this. and we can connect based on what the need is. So that one's a really good resource as well. That was a great point as far as connecting with other parents. And then of course, like your local education service centers. So like the ESCs, they sometimes have just information on the local, and of course it's going to be different for each region, but that's just another kind of point to it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Okay, so I want to go back on what Kiki brought up about IEPs, because I do think that is something that a lot of parents, can learn more about. But when we talk about IEPs, Kiki, what are the best practices for like creating and implementing one that's going to address both the academic needs as well as the mental health needs?
Well, from start, when I'll just use example of when I had a student intern in one of my classes, and she was from another state and she didn't have any services from our district yet. So basically, we were just evaluating her first, just getting teacher checklists from her physician, and we had to check off, do we see these behaviors, that kind of process, and then we had to have a meeting to see if she qualifies. And after that step, if she qualifies, they do a battery of tests for all subjects, and they do social tests, psychological tests through the school psychologist. And then after that, if your child meets the criteria, then they start to come up with a plan in the areas that they struggle with, that they have most difficulty with. For example, I used my son's struggle with math. It was math processing. So with him having that processing, he also had anxiety with that because he had test anxiety. So it's just a whole lot of things mentally and education wise he had going on with him. And that was like the early years, but through that process, I was able to that's how I learned most of my all the things I know about education, because my son actually went through the process. And it's different going through it when you're a teacher than it's with your kid and you're a teacher. So I see both sides of it. And I had to, some points I will let my husband take lead on that because I was too close to the situation. I did spec ed. So, and the thing you have to do is you have to really advocate. At first, they want to give your child, at first I found the experience, they want to give him every accommodation, every modification. I'm like, no, I like to start off minimum and then we build up. At least give him an effort to try. And some things he did end up needing and some things he didn't need. But you have to really stay on them. You have to actually look at the test. If you don't understand, you have to have them explain it to you. If you don't understand, it's okay to ask the school psychologist or the child's case manager to explain that to you. But when we implemented the plan, I was very careful. You have to really monitor your child's the things they bring home, the notes, and be vigilant about what this testing schedule is. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly. I think now in the state of Texas, I know you have to share the teacher has to share the curriculum with the parents, so it's visible, so they know exactly what they're doing. So just make sure you know what the assignments are, and you know what accommodations. Your child come home with an assignment and you don't see any accommodations or modifications to that assignment according to the IEP, you should really say, hey, I noticed that you sent this home, but I don't see the modifications or the accommodations that he's supposed to have regarding his assignments. So you have to make sure. Actually, I have my sons always next to me. In fact, next year I know for a fact that he has a new coordinator. I'm going to have the IP ready in case they have trouble logging in, because first time employees have trouble logging in. So I just make sure I have all the things that my son needs before we even start. That's the best advice I can give to a parent. Just know what you're dealing with. It's a new school year now, and I'm glad we're having this talk now before Northside start. I know some school districts started already, but just start now. I start now. First day of school. I already have a list already ready to hit send for my son's teachers. I'm trying to give them a week to get settled, but I just wanted to start off things on the right foot.
No, send it now. So I think it's important that when we talk about IEPs, that mental health is very rarely addressed in an IEP because it is based academically. So a school psychologist that is doing testing, it is within the academic setting. It is not a clinical psychologist battery of tests. It is, I've been in multiple IEP meetings where there is, we have seen things, we have identified things that are an issue, but they don't rise to the level of academic support needed. So if your kid is dealing with anxiety or ADHD, and it's not necessarily impairing their learning, they're not going to qualify. And that can be very frustrating because there's only certain areas that you can qualify. You can qualify with a learning disability in math or reading. You can qualify as intellectually disabled. Those are going to be your higher needs kids. You can be emotionally disturbed. Don't like the wording, but that can be what it is. They'll get a little bit of extra support. They might get counseling with the school psychologist if it's deemed needed. And then you can have OHI, which is other health impairment, and that can be kind of a range of things. But it's going to be based on academics. So if you are wanting mental health support for your kid, the school is not the best place to start. Sorry. I would do testing outside at a clinical setting. If they diagnose them, again, anxiety, ADHD, depression, certain things, ODD does not count as in a 504, but those would be covered in a 504 plan. Those mental health things could be covered in a 504 plan. And that's where you would want to go. It is when those things, a lot of times that OHI, that other health impairment qualifier for ADHD, is because it is impairing their learning. They are not being successful in the classroom academically. And so we need other supports. And when you have something specifically, because it's going to be anxiety, but ADHD is going to be sort of a mental health concern that might get you qualified for special education, be very cognizant of the accommodations that are provided to your child. Like Jenny said, the psychoeducation of what ADHD is and what can be done. Many times we give kids extra time, 3 days for an assignment with ADHD. You are just giving them 3 days to put it off. That's not how they work. The more unstructured time, the more time to hang out. I have watched kids get extra time on state testing. They get till the end of the day when it used to be timed. It's not timed anymore. And they would just stare at the wall until 2:30, and then they would start. And so being kind of aware of what it is, and like the hyperactivity and the needing fidgets and those kinds of things that they need for their brain to function. That I'm literally playing with my my knockoff AirPods right now, because I have to have something. So being, like Kiki said, being very conscientious and aware of what accommodations you're getting, and not just like, we're going to give them everything and we're going to do all these things because they need it. But knowing that it's going to be academically based. So if your kid is doing fairly well academically, special education testing, it might not get the result that you wanted. If they're struggling more with mental health, you're going to need to kind of go outside. And then at that point, kind of circle back to the school counselor. And then there are sort of accommodations and things. If you need a 504 plan, we can do that. And we can implement them officially. You can also just like reach out and say, hey, my kid sometimes needs a break. And hopefully we can sort of implement those things, just because they're human beings who need help sometimes. Ideally, you have a counselor that looks at it that way. But yeah, I think that's where we get a lot of we get frustrated because the IEP isn't providing everything we wanted it to provide. And it's not really a catch-all for everything. It is truly academic support to get them on grade level.
So tell me, if you guys can, in what way can the child's mental health professional support the family when completing an IEP or 504, or even for an ARD meeting? I know in North Carolina, it may be different here, but mental health professionals were able and encouraged to go to the meetings, provide feedback, of course, with an ROI and all that great stuff. But, we were included in that conversation. Is that the same in Texas?
I'm not sure if it's the same in Texas, but I know you can basically have anyone. I think you can choose who you want to have at the meeting anyway. So that's still your choice. So you can bring your professional with you. In fact, I've been on it an IEP meeting when there was a clinical professional in the room, just to help with accommodations, like give the child quiet space or preferential seating, like she was talking about. We're just saying they need to test outside of a certain room, or they don't like to be around crowds, that kind of thing. That was very supportive in creating those accommodations, which they asked for. Like my son gets extra seating, small group. So that would be the time when the clinical professional can actually advocate those things for the child and for the student.
And I'll speak to parents if they have a question in regards to the insurance piece of this. So like if you bring your child to a practice, of course, insurance and covered, you can check with your insurance plan to see if the location of school is covered under your specific insurance plan. And if so, then it is a billable service by a licensed clinician to provide support at that location.
That's great. It's good to know.
Just make sure every plan is different, of course, but
Yeah, but
it
that's up
is
to
a
two.
location. It is a location that can be billed. All right, so then I have another question for you ladies then, because coming from higher education, and I want to make sure that we encourage our littles as well, how can students advocate for themselves in regards to their mental health needs in the school environment? I know from a higher education standpoint, we, like for first years, we encourage them to go to DSS and to just take a test, talk to someone to see if there are accommodations that would benefit them. That is drilled into them during orientation. You know, the DSS person comes and talks to all the freshmen, all the incoming freshmen. But before they reach college, you know, is how else can they advocate for themselves at school?
I think as they get older, I know, the schools that I worked at by middle school, definitely by like 8th grade. And then in high school, the student is an active participant in their, specifically like IEP meetings or 504 meetings, if it's specifically like advocating for those kinds of accommodations. As a parent, allowing your kid to be an active member in that when they're littler, obviously it's different, but knowing what it is, I think we've sort of moved away from it, but there was many a time in my earlier years in education where I was told, hey, my kid is autistic and we haven't told them, so just FYI. And I was like, that's a disservice to your child. That was, like I said, 15 years ago, so we've had a bit of a change in that. But being honest with your child and letting them be educated in what they have a diagnosis in and what they're struggling with, so that they know that there's nothing wrong with them. Like that's what I would see is kids feeling like something is wrong and they don't want to talk about it because then there's shame based in that I don't want to talk to anyone if there's something wrong with me. So in your home, talk about mental health, talk about your struggles. If you have struggles, talk about people in public that discuss any sort of mental health issues, and just discuss them as a thing that exists the same way we discuss heart disease, cancer, things like that, things that people deal with. And that's just something that exists so that the conversation is easier for them to have. And then at schools, tell your kids to find a trusted adult. Hopefully it's a school counselor. Hopefully it's their teacher. But pick one, an adult that you trust on that campus, that when you're feeling these feelings that you associate to be negative, that you can talk to them so that they can help you. And then help them find the right words and ways to verbalize it. Because a lot of times they don't know originally when they're younger, or even at all when they start to feel off. I would say kids, older-ish teenagers, are a little bit more aware of words, anxiety, depression, and those kinds of things, and they are better able to sort of verbalize it. But then sometimes they just don't, and they just like, I don't feel good. And then being able to sort of teach them the language so that they know how to advocate for themselves. Am I anxious continuously? Am I just worried right now about this test? What am I feeling? Because they will get worried about a class and they will come to the counselor and they will say, I think I have generalized anxiety disorder and I don't know how to tell my mom. And I'll be like, okay, what's going on? And being able to opening up the conversation makes it a lot easier for them to advocate for themselves because it's a safe space to talk about it.
And also, may I add also that it'd be a good thing for your child to know their case manager if you have IEP, to make sure that person, usually my case manager, the person I work with in Collab, before we had an IEP meeting, they would take the child out and we would talk about it. I would talk to the child, say, hey, is there anything else that you need? We have about to have this meeting. Is there anything you else need from me as your teacher? Is there anything I need to be concerned with or anything you want me to bring up? So I would have those meetings with my students myself when we had an IEP meeting, to make sure they can also know that I'm on their team too, and they can tell me their things. And also to tell them too, if this is your meeting about you, that you speak up. This is your chance to talk about what you need. This is all about you. We're here because of you. So if you iterate that too, that this is the time for them to speak about what they need, and have them practice it. That I've done too, because they may have difficulty speaking up about what they want. They may feel nervous. So I would tell them to write it down if you don't want to talk, if you don't want to say it out loud, but to make sure they know that they had a voice in their education. Because like I said before, it's all about them.
Good point, ladies. Good points. Thank you so much. I guess I want to kind of end on the note of asking what ways can schools, but also us as mental health professionals, promote a culture of mental health awareness among everybody involved. So students, teachers, and parents. I know we've touched on it kind of throughout the discussion, but are there any last points that you guys feel need to be repeated or reiterated to make sure that everybody is on the same page in regards to the culture of mental health, especially of our kiddos?
Well, for me, I've shared before that I've had anxiety struggles with my students before. And I think because of my experience that I've helped parents with that too. Some parents, we all want the best for our kids, but no, I've been guilty of this myself. You kind of want your children to overachieve. You want them to be, the best in everything. But you kind of have to set that aside and think about what's best for your child. And just by being honest, I struggle in math. So when my child asks why they struggle in math, I'm like, you got it from me. I'm like, if back then I was GT, they put everybody in GT. They didn't care whether or not you were good and not good in one subject. You were just straight GT. I had no business being in GT math. Absolutely not. Me and my dad sat at the table every night. Doing homework. I was sit there and just take every note that my geometry teacher told me, and I would just go to my dad. This is what we learned today, and he would explain it to me all over again. But I should have had collaboration math. Or local curriculum math. That's where I should have been. But just being honest about your short givens. No one's perfect, like we all know. But I know we know it, but we don't actually admit it. But just being open and honest about your struggles. Well, my kids know all my struggles. Me too. And just being honest about it.
I'll piggyback off of that and say I was the same way, and I'm very honest about the things that I have been diagnosed with kids and adults. And I think sort of just talking about it is always my sort of like the drum that I continue to beat, is that like being open and honest and sort of destigmatizing mental health as if there's something, again, wrong with. And there's nothing wrong. This is just something else that we all sort of deal with. And it's sort of always been sort of othered, like, oh, we have this, it's over here in this box. And it's just another piece of your health and well-being that we take care of. And your kids need to learn about it. And as parents, like, be open with your own, struggles if you have them. And that way your kids will be willing to talk to you when they feel something, and just talking about it. I think as clinicians, just is any way that we can connect with schools and just make it a more open conversation is the best thing we can do, because it's still sort of like this thing that we try to hide, like, don't, oh no, they're over here. And that it's more nuanced than there are kids who have severe depression and then there's everyone else. There's all this range of things, and psychoeducation and talking about it is going to be the best thing that you can do.
I agree. I think, I always say psychoeducation, talking about it, but I think part of it too is just normalizing it. And so whether that's talking about it ourselves or normalizing it among schools and professionals, whether it's like monthly awareness or just different things that are more, I know it can sometimes, limited resources, limited time. I totally get it. So it's not always feasible to just, let's this month we're going to talk about this, or this month we're going to talk about that. And I know sometimes, especially like we have the teacher in services and those meetings, and there's already so much information that is packed into those that it can kind of be repetitive. And a lot of times it's at the end of the day and everybody's just ready to go. And so that can be, really difficult. But like, this is kind of where a lot of times, the parents can take initiative in some of that too, and just providing, whether it's like the PTA, whether it's the, just different groups that we can do. And also just from a mental health perspective. And like, I feel like as, at Osawa, we do a pretty good job of like connecting with the community and trying to provide that outreach. I mean, if you don't have the time or the capacity, reach out to local clinicians, reach out to your mental health resources in the community to provide those resources. It can be fun, it can be creative, but we want to normalize that for people. It's, again, nothing is wrong with you. I think though it's still, while it has gotten so much better, there is still very much a stigma related to, especially among kids, of what that can look like. So it's like, I'm not asking, obviously teachers have enough on their plate, administrators, like we're all, it's a struggle, there's a lot going on, especially in our world. But I think just, if you don't have the capacity, being okay with saying like, hey, this is important to us. We don't have the capacity for it, but can we find someone who does? And, trying to make it, more, more planned, maybe more exciting. I don't know. But just other than just those repetitive, like in services and repetitive, like, especially with like suicide prevention and awareness, like that's something that is obviously so, so important, but I know it can be very redundant and very repetitive, and kind of that like, okay, I've got these other things. So trying to make it fit into, just into that time where we can, and just reaching out to the community resources when needed. And that's completely fine. Just other parents and community resources.
We do have one question from our comments, ladies. So I'm going to just put this out there for you guys. How do you advocate when the teacher fills out a form and the LSSP states parent and teacher form coincide, yet they find kiddos do not need services, or LSSP states, well, I didn't see any issues that coincide with your reports? Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's going to be one of those, it didn't rise to the level of kind of things. So they've seen it. Your teacher sees it. You see it. The LSSPs are amazing. They do amazing work, but they are data based. They do standardized based testing, and your child has to fall in the below or above average range, depending on what it is, for them to qualify. They cannot qualify your child for services if it doesn't fall into that. So just unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Like it is just is what it is. That being said, that doesn't mean you just go, okay, there's nothing going on. That's not the case. It just might not, again, rise to the level of needing services, which means, okay, they are dealing with something. They might not need the level of support that special education would provide. Ideally, in the meeting, which would be a D&Q ARD meeting, it does not qualify admission review dismissal meeting where they would decide whether or not your child qualified. They would be saying your child does not qualify for services. Hopefully, they would have invited somebody from the realm of the 504 aspect of the school, because there's a little less needed to qualify. So if, or I think they call it MTSS now, it used to be RTI. If it is academic struggles that you are seeing, 504 is going to be, like I said, is more diagnosable things. So then if it doesn't rise to the level of qualifying for special education services, they might offer a multi-tiered system of support, MTSS, which is interventions, accommodations in a small period of time to see if your child will close the gap in academic deficiency. I don't like that word, but you know what I'm saying? That's what I would ask for. If that's academic, okay, well then can we get some of the support for that? And then they should have a meeting. There's an MTSS committee meeting, and then you would come back in 4 to 6 weeks with a specifically implemented accommodation plan. If they have a deficit in reading or a deficit in math, they've picked specific things, and there's a book that is this thick somewhere on that campus that has interventions that they can pick. So don't think they can't find one. They will find one. It was in the bathroom of one of the schools I worked at, but it's fine. It's there on the campus. I won't name it. So there's a bajillion interventions they can choose. So academically, there are things that they can and hopefully with those structured interventions after 4, 6, 8 weeks, your kid has kind of gotten to where they needed to be. There was just one sort of specific deficit that they had, and we have closed that gap. If it is more mental health based, then again, I would say go outside of the school system, clinical psychologists, those kinds of things for testing. You can bring that back. Some primary care physicians as well can also do it. My son was diagnosed with ADHD through my amazing primary care physician. He was an amazing man. He gave me the test to fill out, his teacher the test to fill out, the Vanderbilt. And we all said, yeah, he can't sit still and he can't remember anything. Here you go. And so he diagnosed my son with ADHD, combined type. And I brought that to the school and I said, here's your diagnosis. And she said, fantastic. We're going to make a 504 plan for your kid. And then we sat together with the accommodations. So there are other routes. It's not like, sorry, your kid doesn't qualify. It just sort of depends on where you need to go. LSSPs are great, but they can be very just, I'm going to say clinical, but it's not even clinical. It's like, they're just the numbers. And I have been in a meeting, Kiki, maybe you have too, where a kid does not qualify. And it's devastating for the parents because it does sound like, well, then my kid's not going to get anything. Hopefully they're offering these things, but if not, these are the things that you can ask for, because there's not just nothing going on at this point. It's not that they're being abandoned. It's just they didn't rise to the level of needing that level of support, because special ed services are a pretty high level of support. They can be a pretty high level of support. There are lower levels of support that your child might need. So it's not that these things don't exist, and it's not that they don't believe you. It's just that on the range, there's literally like the below average range, and above average range, and they didn't fall where they needed to qualify.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, guys, that's our time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I am going to do a quick plug for an upcoming group that we have for parenting the ADHD child. This will be a virtual group facilitated by Kelly Sellers, who has just dropped like so many nuggets on us today. If you are interested in registering for this class or this workshop group, just give us a call at 210-951-3479, or you can email admin@myusawa.org. We will see you guys in a couple of weeks with the next topic. Thanks so much, ladies.